Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Lucy Kalanithi. I'm a physician down at Stanford, and I'm really excited to be here with you and with Dan Jones, who, as you know, is the editor of the iconic column in the New York Times, Modern Love, which has turned 15 recently.
This month, yeah.
This month, and has now transcended its...
Thank you.
And has transcended its original form to be a really beautiful podcast and a couple of books, and then this beautiful series. And I hear you have some exciting news about that.
Yeah, 2 hours ago, I learned that Amazon has approved a second season of Modern Love. Yeah.
I think we're curious. The first season is set in New York, and do you think any other cities will be the setting for future issues?
It's not going to be in New York next time. It's going to be in a different city, which is pretty much set, but I can't say what it is.
Okay. We have some suggestions. So we were just sitting in the back watching the show, and it was really interesting because I thought maybe you were going to be quiet or something, and then you were giggling at all the parts that everybody else was giggling at.
I've seen this thing like 30 times.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about.
Friends of mine have said that. They're like, why are you, haven't you seen this before? You know?
Yeah.
But this one, especially the last 10 minutes or so, just sort of tear me up every time.
And this is a Modern Love essay from 2005 by Dan Savage, right? He's
right.
One of the
I'm
dads.
not allowed to say that. You can say that.
Oh, okay.
He didn't. The author of this essay didn't want to be identified with it because of the sensitivities about open adoption and that writer's child. But it wasn't so hard for a million people to figure it out really fast.
Right. Right. I mean, I think I'm sure there are people who have already binge-watched the series or will watch it tonight. And it is very interesting to read the essay and then watch I don't know if other people have done that.
Also, it's the most adapted of all of the essays in the series. It really just took a situation, and this is really a John Carney story. He really wrote a new story based on that existing situation.
Can you tell us in general, maybe across the 7 episodes, what you think it has been like or what you've heard from the essayists about their essays being adapted?
Yeah, well, 4 of them I interviewed. So to coordinate with the series launch, I interviewed 4 essayists: Anne Leary, Terry Cheney, Julie Hogben, and a 4th one. And in each case, except for Terry Cheney, so I'm not like a journalist in the traditional sense. I'm really an editor, and this is sort of a weird column in the first place. And I used to do this column from outside of the Times building up in Massachusetts where I live. But for the past few years, I've been living in New York during the week and in Massachusetts on the weekend, and I've been working at the Times and sort of getting acclimated to that. And so they're trying to make me a journalist so that give me assignments. So I'm not really used to interviewing people and turning them into articles. So I thought it would be a great idea to have them come into the Times and interview them and then show them the episode and then get the reaction to that. And that was just the most fraught experience.
Wow.
And it went well, and in every case, they really liked the episode. But I underestimated what it would be to write a really revealing essay about yourself, about about sort of the most important story in your life, have that changed in certain ways, and then have an actor playing you, and then sit through it. And they were, Deb Kopachan was the last writer. And in every case, they liked it, but it was, for me, I was just watching like this, just so nervous about how they would respond. But all of the writers, they were thrilled to be selected for it. It's 8 essays out of 700 at that point that we were choosing from. And they've come to the premiere party, and it's been a blast.
What's it been like for you to Well, you're a consulting producer, so I'm not quite sure what that is. Maybe you can share sort of
Yeah.
like a day in the life or what it was like, and then just how it's maybe felt. What made you want to adapt? That's a double barrel question, but you want to answer.
I mean, I was so glad it was happening. And a consulting producer you can be very invisible or you can be very involved. At the beginning, my role was helping them with the archive of essays. And, they just had this huge, they being John Carney, who probably read 500 essays for this project.
I'm just going to point out that you've read 100,000, so.
Yeah. So he's just starting out, in other words.
It's like protege.
The two Amazon studio executives who are deeply involved, the executive producer Todd Hoffman, and a couple of other people. And we just sort of collaborated mostly by email on what essays could work. And they were sort of clear to me about, like, don't try to be a television producer. Like, just what stories like really work for you, that you are memorable to you, and beyond that it was variety. They wanted the show to reflect the variety of love that's in the column, not just be romantic love or whatever. So it was really hard trying to represent what you felt like you wanted to represent in 8 episodes. Yeah. So, and then in the end, they wrote a bunch of scripts. And in the end, it was about the strongest scripts. So it was both a variety, but also, like, some scripts just didn't work that well. And
were you involved in that part? You were reading the scripts and giving feedback?
I was reading the scripts. I was once we had met as a group, we became more of a team, which was fairly far along into the process, and all on set and all of that. It was more like a team. I was always sort of just along for the ride. I would help, and I help promote it, and I've been sort of the liaison between all these different parties and the Times, and I've sort of been in the center of all that, and I guess that's probably one of the most important roles. But for me, it was just a thrill. Like, it was such a thrill to participate in it and to see it done in a way that. So there's a previous version of Modern Love Television that happened like 6 or 7 years ago that didn't go anywhere. They shot a very expensive pilot for an hour-long, very expensive pilot, and it was before the age of anthologies. It was really before the streamers. Amazon Studios didn't exist, and but it started as an HBO project, and they didn't take up the script, and then it became a Lifetime project. But it was they created a sort of regular cast. There was the Modern Love editor, his colleagues, his disintegrating marriage.
Yeah. Disintegrating marriage.
Fictionally. It was his fictionally disintegrating marriage. And he was like a science editor, and because he couldn't get in touch with his feelings, they made him they gave him this new column to edit, and then his marriage fell apart and all of that. It was a promising script, but it just didn't quite come together, and they didn't take it up, and I was I was devastated because I like to see things happen, and it didn't happen. But this concept is just so much more true to the column, and it's the same way that the podcast takes stories and presents them in a new way. And so that's what made me most happy about it. And even though I was on set a lot, I still had a job. I'd go to work every day, and I'd sort of play hooky and go off to the set, which could not have been more fun. And I was an extra in two of the episodes.
Oh, really? Tell us which ones.
Episode 6, I'm fairly obvious at the beginning of episode 6. Episode 4, I'm a diner behind John Slattery and Tina Fey when they're sort of arguing. They're having a family meal in a restaurant, and I'm behind them. And I'm such a good extra that no one sees me. No one notices me. I showed a rough version of the episode to my son at home, and I said, the scene is like 2 minutes, if that. And I said, I'm in this scene. And we sit there and watch the scene, and he was like, where were you? So it's just sort of my head, and just like this, like right behind John Slatter's head. But they're in a conversation that you're paying attention to, and because it's really my breakout role as an extra, which means don't move, don't, just look natural. So I'm very invisible in that one.
Was there anything in particular that in adapting it was really surprising?
What would be surprising about adapting it? There's an episode that stars Anne Hathaway that, most of the episodes are fairly true to, they're fairly conventional, I guess. And this Anne Hathaway episode, she's playing someone who is bipolar and is dating while bipolar, and it's this fabulous essay about that by Terry Chaney, who I just saw in LA last night, and we did an event together and showed that episode. But it's the episode itself is so creatively done, and I was a little worried about that essay as an episode because it's really an episode about her bipolar history and two dates that either don't happen or don't go well. And I was like, is that enough? Like, and in that, in conceiving that episode, they I started to worry that like there was so much pressure about this. Shooting this in New York, there were 6 days per episode. There are 120 people on set. They're in the middle of the city. Like, I don't know how people do this work. I could never do it in a million years. And it's very intense. And by the time they were doing her episode, I thought they'd sort of lost it a little bit because he had embraced this idea of, he talked to Terry Chaney, and she said her manic periods are, she feels like she's the star of her own title sequence of a sitcom all the time, and everything is more colorful and all of that. And so they were really creative in doing that, and they just decided, let's do that. Let's have her be the star of her own think she's the star of her own sitcom. Good. Let's have her dancing. Yeah. Let's have a dance sequence break out in the parking lot of Fairway, and all this crazy stuff happens, but. Because I only saw pieces of it, I didn't see how the episodes were shaping up. And like that episode, I just thought was all light. I just thought it was all I worried that it was going to be all light and fluffy. And I didn't see all the finished, or not even finished episodes, but semi-edited episodes until one night. It was like 11 o'clock at night. And I'd been asking all day because I knew that they were in a phase where they could be shared, and I was asking all day to get them. And they're like, "Oh yeah, they're coming." Finally, at 11 o'clock at night, I get the email, and the software they gave me is all filled with all these episodes. And I was like, "I'll watch 2 of them, and then go to bed. I'd go to work in the morning." And oh my God,
that's a lot of self-restraint. I'm impressed.
I watched all of them, and I was like just sobbing and sort of a mess, and my glasses were all like speckled with water, and it was sort of disgusting. And but the feeling, like I was both moved by the essays, but mostly I just had this feeling of relief, and I just thought they did it, like they did it, like they have this combination of emotion and humor and complication, all with sort of an upbeat, even when it's problematic. Like she doesn't, in the Anne Hathaway episode, like Terry Chaney's problems aren't resolved. She's like goes on medication. She figures out how to manage it. Hasn't found love. Like there's not resolution in these cases. And in this episode too, it's like, good luck now. Like now you have a child and a homeless birth mother who's going to be in and out of the child's life, but there's something so sort of sweet and optimistic and hopeful, and that's sort of the John Carney signature, that he doesn't change the story to make it optimistic. It's presented in a way that does that, and I just loved that because that's sort of how I feel, and I feel like he and I are good partners in that sense.
That one episode I think is really moving, the one you're talking about with Anne Hathaway, where there's sort of like this musical dance scene in the grocery store, and it's a really moving portrayal of illness. I thought it was actually really good, and it sounded like, I read your interview with the essayist, and it sounded like she felt that way too. Like it didn't
She was
simplify
really happy
her
about it.
situation.
She was really nervous about it
I
and
bet.
really happy
It was
about
really brave to do
Yeah.
it. I
Yeah.
was really impressed.
And that was an example of me exercising restraint and not knowing what the hell I was doing with television. Because when I read that script, and I'm sorry for those of you, I don't know how many people have seen this episode. It's episode 3. So I won't be spoiling things to say there's a very powerful scene at the end. And when I read that scene in the script, I almost wrote and said, like, are you, like, seriously? Like, this is, like, this, it seemed improbable to me. It seemed forced. And I just, oh, you're getting questions. And I almost wrote and said, like, I just don't find this a credible scene. And when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, thank God you kept your mouth shut.
For you.
Because it's such an example of like a filmmaker. And a couple times John said to me, like, when I did question things, he was like, well, you'll see how we do that. I see what you're talking about, but you'll see how we do that. And that was an example of that. When I hadn't seen that scene being filmed. I'd just seen the dance numbers and all of that. So when I saw it, I was just like, oh my God.
It's nice because I imagine you have actually been on the other side of that a lot, where you're the editor and people need to trust you. So
Right,
I kind of
that's
love
true.
that you trusted them. It was interesting. Well, okay, I'm going to read through these too. So from people downstairs in this room, please keep sending these. I'll definitely ask them. I wanted to mention one thing, which is I read at one point that you were the person who said initially on starting the column, I want to accept submissions from real people at an email address that anybody can write to instead of commissioning the essays.
Right.
And that's so, I was really surprised to hear that because it seems like such a central piece of what you do is real stories.
Yeah. And the only reason I thought to do that, well, there were 2 reasons I thought to do it. One, because I'd just done a book. My wife and I had done these books, The Bitch in the House and The Bastard on the Couch, which were books about sort of difficulties in contemporary marriage. But they were essay collections where we commissioned all these essays from writers. And it's really hard to commission essays from writers, and you get stuff that you have to kill and create bad feelings. And you wait for it to come in, you have to press people and all that. So just the difficulty of that process. But the other part of it was I was like a struggling writer for years, and I'd send stuff off, and I'm not the best writer in the world, but I knew that there are people who were, and there were people who were undiscovered, and so many people, who have a story to tell. And there's something about Modern Love where it's, we certainly publish plenty of published authors and people who have books out and all of that, but the person telling their story for the first time, you're not going to get that out of an established writer. Often you're not going to get the most important story of their life out of an established writer. So I wanted that. I didn't want to think about what I wanted in the column. I wanted people to tell me what should be in the column through submitting stories that demanded to be in the column, basically. And the other thing that I wanted to promise, which is going to get increasingly hard to deliver, is responding to everybody who submits. Because again, as a struggling writer in my 20s, I would send stuff off, and if I never heard back, I wouldn't send back to that publication again.
Right.
Because
Do you write something personal? Or is it just that you want them to know that you did read it, it wasn't chosen?
It's
How
a
much do you
standard
tailor?
note. I've been told it's very kind. And we put the person's name on it, We don't just send it without a name. And it just makes people feel good, even if it takes 6 months, which it sometimes does, just to know. And people are, 99% of the people are grateful, 1% write nasty notes back.
Ooh. Thank you.
But I think when this column started and I wanted to know how long I could, possibly count on that paycheck, I asked the then style editor what the shelf life is for columns like this, and he said, I don't know, a year, 3 years.
Oh, wild.
And I think that the only reason it stays fresh to the extent that it does is that process of people trust that they're sending to a place where it's going to be read, they're going to hear back, and that it's their material that's going to determine what it is. And you can't sit in a meeting with other editors, and I sit in meetings with other editors all the time, and they come up with ideas for stories. And I just don't feel like this is something where you can come up with ideas for stories. Like, it has to come from the great out there.
I have a couple questions from the great out there, which is a couple that are on this issue together about, have you seen trends in the tonality or the themes or evolution over time of what you're seeing in the submissions?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different trend lines, some that have evolved with social changes, and gay marriage didn't exist, dating apps hardly existed, social media hardly existed, cell phones, smartphones as we know them now, and texting, none of that existed when the column started. So, but the problems and the insecurities all remain the same. And it's interesting to me to see how we seize on new technology to avoid vulnerability. How we sort of seize on and how we think. Like, technology makes so many things easier, and as a shortcut to so many things, and we can't get it out of our heads that it should be a shortcut to love and to finding love and to keeping it. That it should be the sort of silver bullet for that, and instead it just. And I'm not saying it doesn't. I mean, so many people have found love through dating apps, and are able to stay in touch through Skype and texting, and it's created a whole new kind of intimacy in a lot of ways, and that's interesting to observe. And but I don't. There's always this sort of aspirational quality to love and relationships that we think we can do it better. Like, we look at our parents, and we look at our
Like, optimize.
we just think, oh, they were stuck in those roles, but we're gonna bust through all that, and we're gonna do it better, and we're
I do think that.
And we're always trying to sort of improve it in that way, and then we're frustrated when we're like someone leaves us, and we're like, but we were doing it better, like, and I like that about the subject matter because. It's not masterable,
Totally.
It's full of pain, and it's full of insecurity, and it will be your whole life, and get used to it.
And it sounds like it sounds like you think there's no shortcut through vulnerability, right? Like, that is the path.
Right, but there's a lot of we have more ways to avoid it than ever.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I have a question from somebody about the show. This person wrote, do you feel as if the viewers of the show will be the, quote, liberals that Carla criticizes? How can we bring other audiences into this discussion that you hope to create?
That's a good question, but what's interesting about the audience for this show is it's global. And, I grew up in a time when TV was local and national, and I can't get my head around how Amazon Studios, I don't know how many Prime members there are in the world, but I know it's at least 130 million or something like that, and
they know people are watching it because they
and
renewed
in
you.
200,
they know.
Yeah, 200 countries or something, and to create a show that's not for San Francisco and New York and Los Angeles, like, that's not enough. Like, this has got to play in New Delhi, and then Hong Kong, and Malaysia, Egypt. So you're conceiving a show that, and it's translated and dubbed into, I think, 8 or 9 languages, and then it's subtitled in a bunch of languages I've never even heard of.
Wow.
And So what's to anticipate who that audience is and what they want and what they're going to watch again. I don't know. That's just a whole new world to me. But it's not. In that way, it's not the same audience as the written column. The podcast became a little more international than the written column, but this audience, who knows? We'll find out.
Yeah, you'll find
that's
out.
the one thing
and
about it is
you'll know.
Amazon will know.
Yes,
They'll-
that's wild.
They'll know every
Right.
single person who's
Right.
watching the show and how
Right.
long they watch it, and
Right.
they might even know when they're laughing or not if they have a
my
Alexa
God.
in the room.
Oh my God. Yeah. I have a number of questions in this pile that are about love generally. And when I was taking a lift up here, I told the driver what I was doing and said, I'm going to be part of this event. And I explained the column Modern Love and talked a little bit about that. And then the conversation evolved very quickly to talking about the driver's opinions on polyamory and this woman named Sasha. And it actually became really intimate sort of
Yeah.
quickly. And then I got out of the car and said, good luck with your love life, and closed the door. And he said, thank you. And I imagine that this happens to you all the time. Maybe. I mean, that's what I'm curious about is, foremost, you're an editor. But then I imagine lots of other people in it secretly kind of think of you as this love guru, like you've seen from the mountaintop or something. And so I don't know exactly what the question is. Some of the questions that are in here say, what have you learned about love, or what do we misconceive about love that you see repeated struggles with?
Right. I mean, I do become that that person that people just they sort of unload their stories, and it happens in book signing lines. It happens just in any sort of environment, and sometimes, usually, it's really interesting, and
Hey, thank you.
sometimes it gets a little weird and it's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I bet.
But my job, I see my job when I'm working on people's stories, and now I've done it long enough where people trust me with their stories, and so I get on the phone with everybody I publish, and sometimes I get on the phone with them for a long time, and I always want to find out.
Always go on the phone, like not just email, but you always talk.
Oh, always, yeah. And I have a lot of purposes for that phone call, but a lot of it isn't some pre-planned list of questions. I just want to probe the story, and I want to find out if there's something more, if there are other connections that could be made, and whatever. Yeah. So it's just sort of a free-flowing conversation. But sometimes I find myself asking questions that, I'm a pretty traditional, boring, person and shy generally, and all that. And I'm sort of surprised that I've become this person who just is pressing people for these intimate details of their lives.
Right.
But under the guise of professionalism, it's sort of like a professional voyeur in a way.
Totally.
And people tell me anything. They absolutely just tell me whatever I ask.
Wow. Yeah.
And a few times people will start to withdraw a little bit and they'll say well, wait, are you going to put that in? Are you talking about should we put that in? But the whole way that a personal essay works is that the reader can't think you're withholding anything. It may be that you're withholding things, and you're also making choices about what to include and what not to include because you've got 1,500 words to tell the story. But the reader can't think you're hiding anything. And for that reason, I love the Times has all these rules, that magazines don't have, and where you can substitute names, and you can you can use someone's initial for to hide their identity, or change names and hide behind all these things. And to me, that just erodes the credibility. Every single one of those erodes the credibility because it's not full disclosure. Doesn't seem like full disclosure. So often what I'm doing with a story is zeroing in on the parts where it's you're not telling everything here, and you're not telling everything here, and you're trying to make yourself look good here at the expense of that person there. And all that stuff, readers sense, whether they know it or not, they sense it.
Do you have advice for writers that you, whatever it might be. I was reading something that someone was asking you, what's your process for going through essays? And you say you can go pretty quickly,
Right.
but you do give it a chance as you go along. But if you see certain, I think you said lazy adjectives like amazing, you'll be like, like this is not good. And so I'm curious, like, are there certain things, principles that you look for, or general writing advice in a way?
Yeah, I mean, the easy thing to spot is someone who is sort of humble, and like it's a tone of having been through something and lived to tell the tale in a way. And it's not bragging. It's just in fact, it's the opposite of bragging. It's like an offering. It's like this tone of sort of, here's what I have to offer you, and then that has to be that tone, which is really about being vulnerable. It's like saying, like, I messed up, and I was humiliated, or I was rejected, or it's admitting all these things that make you feel bad, and combining that with a kind of intelligence that is can appear at different times in an essay, so that the tone of being of humility sort of will be evident and be probably throughout the piece. But do you learn something from it? And is what you learn something that actually will make people think like, wow, will make them wiser about love? Like, that's really hard. And that's something I'll search through an essay. I'll search for an insight. So if I'm reading and I'm not quite, getting caught up in it or whatever, I'll just start skipping around and look for an insight. And then retroactively, I think I can build the essay around that insight. Wow. But the insight is a hard thing for an editor to bring to a piece. You can work on the writing, you can shape it, you can rearrange it and all of that, but it's hard to bring insight. Sometimes that insight can happen in a conversation, but that's what I'll skip around. And I think writers cringe when I say this, but I'll read like the first couple of paragraphs, and then I'll start to skip a little bit, and then I'll read the last couple of lines without having read anything that came before that. And if there's something, and I can tell, like if there's something that's smart, it'll be evident in those last few lines.
Is that because you can tell if they're a good writer if they ended it in a certain way, or because it gets you to where they thought they ended up or something? Like, why do you skip to? I kind of do that too. I was realizing, but
I don't know. I just if there's something really facile about the last few lines, you'll know that what came before it is not smart.
I have a couple questions that are sort of along the lines of, what do you think true love actually is? No pressure.
I wrote about this in my book, Love Illuminated, because, I have a couple of ways of answering that, I guess, even though I think it's an unfair question.
We can all stand around and talk about it after.
I was asked in a radio interview on NPR once. The person was just led off by saying, "So what is love anyway?" And I was like, "You're really going to start with that?" It was live. I said, "You're really going to start with that?" So one way I wrote about this, and this will date me a little bit, but I don't know how many people have seen the movie E.T. But E.T. to me is the embodiment of love.
Whoa.
And it's because he can heal wounds, and he tells people to be good. He's always telling Elliot to be good. And I feel like those are the two sort of beautiful qualities of love embodied in this character: healing wounds and being good. And I promised you another way of answering that, and now I can't remember what that is.
Tell us if you think of it again. We all want to hear it. That's so beautiful about E.T. My 5-year-old daughter was watching E.T. this morning and then turned it off and cried because it was too scary. And she was watching it alone, and I was like, I'll watch this with you. It won't be scary if we watch it together. And now I feel like we have to watch it together.
The other story about love was
Great.
is something I've written about a couple times as well, which was an essay from many years ago on Mother's Day that was a woman, I'll try to make it short, but it was a couple who'd adopted a baby in China. And, it's a months-long process where you start to get bits of information and pictures and all of that. And they'd sort of fallen in love with this little girl and went to China to get her. And when they got there and took her back to the hotel room and stuff and started to undress her, they saw that she'd had like some surgery on her spine, and they became really worried, and they took her to the hospital and had her examined, and she had they did a CAT scan or X-ray or whatever, and started getting these really alarming findings of that there was a botched spinal surgery. She would never walk. It was all this just horrific stuff, and they were devastated, and went to the adoption facilitators or whatever there, and they were like, "Oh, we're so sorry. In cases like this, we say, well, you can leave her, and
Wow.
we'll have you can leave with a healthy baby, and the choice is yours, basically."
Uh-huh.
And what a choice! Like when I read that essay the first time, I was like, what would I do? Like everybody wants the healthy baby. Are you going to take the baby that is promised to have this horrific life and never be able to walk and deteriorate? And there was even something that they said had some sort of brain injury as well. And it was like this test. It's like, and she said, they thought about it for a little while, and she's like, no, like this is our daughter.
I'm the mom. Yeah.
This is our daughter.
Yeah.
And we
Wow.
love her, and this is the person. Like, could you imagine that choice of like leaving her behind and the guilt you would feel and all that? But she didn't go there. She was just like, this is the daughter we're meant to have. And amazingly, I mean, they brought her back to the States. She did have severe problems and seizures and stuff for a good year or two, but ultimately emerged from it not paralyzed. They saw a series of specialists, and she had been misdiagnosed and did have problems, but emerged to be a completely healthy teenager eventually. I think she's probably 20 now. But that to me is like, when you talk about sort of healing wounds and doing good, like that, that's it encapsulated.
That's
it comes
beautiful.
down to choices like that.
That's beautiful. Do you remember the last line of that essay? Something good.
Don't.
Well, I'll look at it.
It wouldn't have mattered what the last line of the essay was.
Right. That's lovely. It's like the all-in version of love, I think, is what parenting
But I also,
is.
and I hate how love is always equated with romance. Like there's such different things, and it's and when it's called a romance column or something, like romance is not love. It's just not. It's a different.
Can you talk about that a little bit? And also, I think like
romance
sort
is
of
what
this-
traps you into love.
oh, that's good. Yeah. I had a question I kind of wanted to ask you. Oh, we only have 7 minutes. Okay, I'm going to look through these cards too. Actually, I am curious to know. I think people are interested to know there's a question here that says, has there ever been an essay you didn't publish that you still think about or that keeps you up at night? And a couple of other people have asked questions like, how does your work reflect back into your own life?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you have something to say about that. And my side question was, as a parent, does it change the way you even just think about life? Like the way you've said so many things tonight that feel like they're not even like romance or love advice, they're life advice in a way, right? So, but maybe specifically,
I can answer both of those.
all of them.
Yeah, I'll do it really fast. Now we're down to 6 minutes. I regret not being able to publish. I've gotten a lot of, some very powerful essays about sexual assault, and essays become very hard to publish if they become legal problems.
Oh.
And I'm discouraged, when you're presenting something that hasn't been, like we published a few like that, but they'd gone through the criminal justice system and there were records of everything. But to have like he said, she said situations in essays where people can be identified, they just become these huge problems. And they're not really resolvable problems. You can't go to the other party. Like a personal essay is not a reported story where you present everything. It's one person's story and how they remembered it. But if there are other people involved in actual like potential criminal activity, it becomes hard. And we published a story that I'm really proud of by this woman named Bindu Bansanath, who a young Indian immigrant family in New Jersey, and she had been sexually abused for years by not an uncle. They called him an uncle, but he was like a friend of the family, and it was just this ongoing thing. And she's such an incredible writer, young, and was able to write about this stuff. And I was in touch with her for like years over this story, and she finally was able to do it in a way that worked, and she had it had gone through the criminal justice system, and it was a devastating piece, and people were really upset by it. They were like, "This is not love." Like it was one of those ones where we just got a real backlash. But I was so proud of it, and really remain proud of it, and just could not believe her bravery and stepping forth and telling this story. And she was like, her reasoning was like, being silent is what gets people nowhere. Like being silent is just not the place to be with this stuff. And she was sort of willing to take that on. And people are like, "This isn't love, modern or not. It's not love." And it's not. But come on.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's like,
do you remember the title of that one?
It had to do with Lolita, with the book Lolita. I can't remember what the title was. It was from like 3 or 4 years ago. But what was brilliant about it is she was very literary, must have been in high school or so. And she got a teacher had given her a copy of Lolita, and she read Lolita and saw herself in it.
Wow.
And also recognized the power that Lolita had in that situation and started behaving the same way with her abuser.
Wow. Wow.
How literature can save your life,
Wow.
literally.
Wild. You did one, I think it's called My Body Is Not Your Body. Is that what it's
Oh
called?
yeah, I love
it's
that
so
piece.
good.
My body doesn't belong to you.
Yeah. That one's really good about being a young girl who's not sexualized at all. And then you grow up and it's like, you literally cannot move in the world without being sexualized.
Right.
And she talks about how that's not sex and it's not even love. It's actually about power. And it's a really powerful essay. I was really glad you published that one too.
I love that piece. And that was another one that people really responded to, and just, not in a negative way at all. They were like, thank God this stuff is being said.
Okay, we have 2 minutes. People are curious about some of your favorites, if you don't mind naming them. Just like off the top of your head, I'm sure you get asked this a lot, right?
I can never think back that far is the problem. So I always think more recently. I mean, we ran this really charming piece recently that is our most read piece of the year that was called Let's Meet Again in 5 Years. And it was romantic because it's a story that can't happen now.
Yeah.
It was about, and this is what technology has done to us. You know, this couple, they're 18 or something, and really close, but not. You know, obviously they're like, well, we're not going to commit to each other now, and it was before cell phones and before email and before all of that. And they completely lost touch. They said, they made a pact to meet again in 5 years, and they were 23, and that would be a much more appropriate time if they were meant to be. And they were living in completely different places in different parts of the country, and met in front of the New York Public Library on the steps. It was a meeting time and place 5 years down the road, and they were not in touch during those intervening 5 years and didn't even know if the other was going to show up. And then they both did. And it's a real life, romantic comedy. But to me, and also they didn't, when they met up again, they didn't just immediately like run into each other's arms. They're just like, hi, and they sort of had to get to know you. They showed up because they said they were going to show up. And then they had to sort of build that into love. It wasn't, they weren't swept off their feet or anything. And she downplayed it the whole time. She was like, our story is not romantic. It was just a practical solution, We were too young, so let's meet when we're not too young.
Yeah.
But she said, she sort of acknowledges that the romance is in the fact that we showed up.
Totally. Yeah. Are they still together?
Yeah, 40 years they've been married.
Oh, that is romantic. Thank you for this beautiful column. I think, as you can tell, we really love it. We hope you keep doing it for a long time, and you have a lot of fans. We're getting to the end. So Inform has a tradition where we ask everybody.
Oh, no, I forgot about this part.
What is your 60-second idea to change the world? So you're being asked that. What's your 60-second idea? We ask everybody.
So does the 60 seconds mean telling it takes 60 seconds
Yes.
or doing it takes 60 seconds?
I do telling it, but you can do both if you want for extra difficulty.
My 60-second idea to change the world is to assume that everybody has a story worth hearing, and that it's your job to get that story. And it doesn't mean that you have to sit next to the person on the airplane and assault them with questions and whatever. But if the opportunity presents itself, and it presents itself all the time in dating, like be the person who asks the questions and have the questions be increasingly more probing questions. And if you're getting results, keep it up. And men, be the ones who ask the questions, not the one who talk about yourself all the time, because that's how the dynamic often goes. And just because everybody does have that story buried in there. And I think that was the brilliance of this most popular column, Modern Love column of all time, and one of the most popular New York Times articles of all time, To Fall in Love with Anyone Do This, where you were asking each other 36 questions that got increasingly more probing until you really get to know the person. And love blooms in that sort of trust and familiarity. But a lot of people don't do it. They don't ask questions of other people, and they don't probe, and they feel like it's either impolite or they're not interested. And I think a lot of the divisiveness in the world today could be resolved if people were more interested in asking questions and seeking out someone else's story.
That's lovely. Thank you, Dan Jones.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was really fun.
Thank you.